When I was 7 years old, I was cornered by a group of bullies one day after school who wanted to teach me a lesson. And knowing that I had no chance, I just simply crumpled and waited for their impending blows. But as I sat there and moments passed, the blows never came. And so I looked up and there was a figure standing in front of me who was taking their blows and pushing them back and taking their blows and pushing them back until they left. And this individual turned around and behind welled up black and blue eyes smiled at me. And it was my older brother, Jonathan. I don't know where he had come from, but he pulled me in with such a tight embrace, and I felt so safe and still in that moment. And he smiled at me and said the same thing he'd always come to say during the hard moments. "It's all going to be all right, Chief." Jolly Jonathan. I've always described my brother as George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life. Hopelessly kind, relentlessly optimistic, and always waiting for the turn that will probably never come. Him standing in between me and the pains and blows of life would come to define our relationship. When I was getting ready to go to college and it became a dream of mine, he put off his own education so that he could help me make it through. When I was lost and robbed in Southeast Asia, he used up his savings so he could bail me out and I could make it home. And he never once complained. And during that whole time, I always wished that I could be there for him in the same way that he was always there for me. And I finally got my chance exactly 1 year ago. In February of last year, he pulled me aside one day and said that he and his wife were expecting their first baby. Put his hand on my shoulder, his strong hand, and he was like, "Brenton, will you be the godfather?" "Only if I can talk like this," I told him. I was so excited. Fast forward a very quick 8 months, and I get a cryptic text from him in the middle of the night that said, "The baby's movements are abnormal. They need to do a C-section." And before I could realize what was even happening, the baby was born. Jonathan's son, my godson, Elijah, was brought into the world on that day in October. And so that morning, I rushed to the hospital with a basket of baby blue gifts. But when I walked in, there was no baby. Just silence. "Where's the baby, Jonathan?" "He's in the natal ICU. It's pretty normal for preemies," he told me. But something didn't seem quite right. "What's wrong with him?" "Well, Elijah has an esophageal atresia, which means that his esophagus and stomach aren't connected, and the veins and arteries in his heart are actually reversed. But they'll do a couple of surgeries and he'll be right as rain. It's all going to be all right, Chief." But I went home that day worried and disappointed. And strangely enough, the next day actually happened to be Jonathan's birthday. And so I decided I wanted to cheer him up a little bit. So I got a really large basket of all of his favorite foods and a few choice gifts, and I returned back to the hospital, proudly marching. And as I approached those doors, my phone went off again. Another text. "They're airlifting Elijah to the children's hospital. He needs an emergency surgery. I'm on my way there." And in that moment, the weight of those gifts just felt like the world bearing down on my entire spirit. And here he was, the hero of the day, leaving on his own special day to be alone and in distress. And I went home again. Another day passed and another text. "I'm gathering the whole family at the hospital. Please come when you can." So I came and I was greeted by my whole family, and we all anxiously waited to see what Jonathan had to say. And he looked at all of us and he said, "The surgeon told me that he's done all that he can, but Elijah's not going to make it." And the doctor came and explained many things, but the one thing that I held on to was that that little one was crushing himself from the inside. And it seemed in that moment, as was Jonathan. And the next couple of days, family came from all over the country, and we all gathered in this tiny hospital room. And I was looking at the baby through all this intubation and all these machines. And I just remember how sallow and translucent and blue his skin was. It looked like he was suffering greatly. And so I looked around for some sort of validation from someone, but everyone had so much anguish and no one had the strength to say anything. And so the moment came Nurses brought in a fresh set of blue blankets. They took out his tubes and his wiring, swaddled him, and put him in Jonathan's arms. And for 45 minutes, which felt like 45 eternities, we all just stood there in silence with only the whir of machines as his little life slipped back into the ether. When he was gone, Jonathan rose up, strong and proud, and he started crying. It was the first time in my entire life that I had seen my titan of a brother begin to crumble. And so instinctively, I ran over to him and I just held and squeezed him as hard as I could. And for the first time in my life, I was standing in between him and the pains and blows and sorrows of life. And I felt his tears streaming down my shirt and my chest. And I just held him there as I was holding our stories and his pain and our history and his burdens all in one moment. And after a few moments, I looked at him and I whispered, "It's all going to be all right, Chief." And he looked back at me through welled up black and blue eyes, and he smiled. That same jolly, lifelong smile, hopelessly optimistic.